lively discussion because this is something where we want to get your feedback, your input, your thoughts and impressions. We really encourage your participation. And that could be either via the chat feature throughout the session or when we specifically ask for your thoughts and impressions.
He comes right for me.
Which is something that we'll be doing throughout the session. So you can feel free to use your audio for that. I will be attempting to monitor the chat throughout the session for your questions, and I'm going to do my darndest to try to get to most of them, but apologies if I miss any. Our contact information is here on our slide, which I hope everyone can see. So you can feel free to email us after the session and we'll be able to follow up on anything we don't get to today. I also want to share some brief group norms, or more particularly the Charleston Conference Philosophy and Code of Conduct, which states that this conference is an inclusive professional environment. We respect free speech, we invite diverse perspectives and opinions, and we also expect that you're going to treat others with respect and consideration, keep the conference free of discrimination or harassment, and maintain professional and ethical conduct at all times. I don't expect anything less because I know that this is just a wonderful group, but I wanted to mention that to start out. I also want to develop and make sure that we have a shared understanding of acronyms that we'll be using. So BIPOC stands for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color. DEI stands for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And BLM stands for Black Lives Matter. I'll also state that I and my fellow panelists and participants stand with and support Black Lives Matter and the necessary work needed to create equity and inclusion across systems and institutions. I also want to acknowledge that our perspectives on this panel are not entirely representative of the entire communities that we serve. We acknowledge that we can only speak from where we are, from our positions and our knowledge as early career librarians, although I don't know how much longer I can say that I'm early career. I feel like I'm kind of coasting on that at the moment. None of us are in upper management or administration, and our goal is to be very honest and frank while doing no harm. So we welcome you to challenge and criticize ideas, but not individuals. I also want to mention how this panel, this session even got started. This idea came from the Up and Comers Recognition Program, which is something that I'm very honored to lead from year to year. It's part of the Charleston Conference now, and it's a recognition program that recognizes rising stars and early career librarians who are really doing tremendous things to serve their communities and enact change in our profession. And normally when we're all together in Charleston, we do this really great interview series in the beautiful penthouse suite of the Francis Marion Hotel. But since we can't all be together in Charleston this year, we're trying to keep that spirit going by having a lively discussion. So, all right, let's introduce ourselves. I'm Erin Gallagher, the e-resources librarian at the University of Florida in beautiful Gainesville, Florida. And even though you can't tell from my background, I'm located in my home office.
Okay, I'm Sandy Avila. I'm the science librarian at the University of Central Florida, a little bit south of where Erin is. So I'm located in Orlando, Florida. And you can see as I am home in my bedroom, in my little suite part of my bedroom. And yeah, glad to be here.
Hi, I'm Lindsey Barnett. I'm the Collection Development and Scholarly Communication Librarian at the Cushing Whitney Medical Library at the Yale School of Medicine. That's located in New Haven, Connecticut, but I'm coming to you from my kitchen in Stratford, Connecticut at my home.
Hi, I'm Colin Nichols. I'm the Experiential Learning Services Librarian at NC State, based in Raleigh, but as everyone else appears to be, I'm also coming from home despite the tomatoes in my background. I've been home for a while now.
Hi, everyone. My name is Michael Rodriguez. I'm the collection strategist at the University of Connecticut Library. Behind me, you see our main library and Homer Babbage Library, which I am not currently located in. I'm working from home and have been since March, and we expect to through spring as well.
Great. I also want to mention that this is very much a discussion, and we do not have prepared or canned responses. This is going to be an organic discussion that just unfolds as it does. So please accept a certain amount of just completely extemporaneous discussion here. And I think that's going to actually make it more, the whole thing is going to be a lot richer. Now, if there are questions that arise that we would really like your impressions or your thoughts on, I'm going to try to remember to pop those into the chat. All right, so also, if you hear any sort of strange chirping noises, it's my cat who wants to be a part of this very much. Yeah, okay. All right, so friends, tell us about your library's reaction and response to the COVID-19 pandemic, and give us a bit of a ground floor view of your transition to remote work and research and teaching environment.
I'll tackle that one first. So at UCF, we pretty much went remote at the UCF libraries, and we have several libraries, 2 on the main campus, and then several campus libraries, one in the downtown campus, downtown Orlando, and then some others in different parts of the city. So we all pretty much went remote in March and have been home for the most part. We do have, I mean, the library for us is an essential place on campus to be open. So especially in Florida with our political situation, we've had to kind of reopen earlier than many people, either on the West Coast and in different parts of the country. So we've adjusted as we have been able to based on different departments. I work in the Research and Information Services Department, which is reference. And we were actually pretty lucky in terms of creating a new kind of way to do reference. We call it telereference, but it's basically utilizing Zoom to have basically our reference desk service through this technology as we're doing right now. And so we were able to, stay at home and be able to still still physically be at the desk through the technology, where some of the other service desks in the library had to actually have physical staff attend and be there. So each department works a little bit differently, but we've been able to keep really great communication. We pivoted and switched very fast in terms of being able to kind of put everything to remote. And so far, we're just kind of handling all that's coming to us as quick and as swift as possible.
I can jump in next. So we also closed down about mid-March, and it was a decision that was made quickly and that was acted upon quickly. So my geographic area was hit very hard early on with the virus. So it was in a matter of a couple of days before we said, okay, it's in the area, now we have to shut down. At first, all services were shut down. We did switch to remote, which worked pretty well for us, actually. I think like Sandy said, we were already using Zoom heavily for our own internal purposes. So we just kind of transitioned that into a way to continue to do classes and consultations with patrons. And we're able to successfully, I think, switch our services to remote offerings. And that has worked pretty well. We've begun to sort of slowly offer up services again. So now we do have staff on site who are doing scan and delivery, who are doing the checkout of physical books. So we've been slowly opening back up, but we're still offering, I'd say, the majority of our services through Zoom.
I'll jump in and say at NC State, it was pretty similar to what you're both describing as well. We all went home on the 13th of March, and the buildings themselves, we have 2 main libraries and a couple of branches, 3 branches, and they all closed on that day. They remained closed until the middle-ish of or late July, and then they kind of staggered, had a couple staggered openings. One of the big things so my job is in our experiential learning services and spaces, places like our makerspace, our digital media labs, our VR studio, places like that. And so one of the big pivots for my work has been, how do we find ways to share those kinds of physical places in this kind of online world, and converting our workshops, which previously you would have, a handful of electronic components and you'd be plugging them together and things like that. How do you do that in an online environment? And that's been true across the libraries and all the different ways that we teach and provide services. Another great example is our textbook collection. I have at least 1 copy of every required textbook across campus for every course. And normally you come to the library and you ask and you get that for 2 hours. And right now we're scanning a chapter at a time and sending them out to students who just needed that chapter, just needed the homework and things like that. So it's really, really heavily reliant on the digital aspect of what the library has to offer.
I'll echo what everyone said so far. I think Ucon's situation's been parallel. We went remote in mid-March, and we only reopened the library for limited services starting August 31st. Limited services like study space reservations in advance, picking up materials, printing. We did move and are continuing to stay in a paging only access to the stacks. So the stacks themselves are closed and folks have to request materials be retrieved for them to pick up. We also paused our print reserves program because of the multi-day quarantine periods that are required for people to handle physical materials that the student before them handled. It really wasn't tenable. So we've accelerated our electronic purchasing. We are purchasing print only if the electronic version is not available. We really ramped up our streaming video offerings to the extent that we could. And as folks are saying in the chat, we made some deep cancellation decisions around print journals and standing orders that had sort of been in the works for a long time, but which the pandemic, I think, really foregrounded the need to rethink the format of those resources. I think the pandemic's also made us really think about the role of digital strategies in the context of our print collection. So, Uconn is a member of the HathiTrust Temporary Emergency Access Service. We've also been participating in some conversations and thinking around controlled digital lending and other opportunities to open up access, remote access to our collections. Because so many of our students are remote. Our students and faculty are remote. Our dorms are at about 40% capacity, and we expect that to be in the spring as well. So how can we continue to serve those remote users even as we start slowly coming back to campus is something we've been working through a lot these past few months.
Thank you so much for these excellent perspectives. I really like the diversity of roles that we play. I don't know about y'all, but I do tend to start to think that every other library professional in the world is just all about e-resources. And so I'm glad that we have perspectives on the panel and from our attendees who are representing lots of different places in the library and who can speak to more than just what it was like to make sure all the links were working when we went remotely. And in fact, there's a really great conversation going on in the chat right now about how this has affected print collecting. I noticed some people have mentioned that they changed their approval plans to e-preferred or just totally paused their approval plans. I know that at UF, we weren't doing a whole heck of a lot with approval to, anymore to start with. But for example, we have really ramped up e-reserves and have really been trying to do more purchasing of unlimited access ebooks to support the remote learning community. So, all right, so I have a bit of a wild card question that just popped up in the chat that I think is interesting. Anyone else have experience encouraging students to wear masks in the library? I will say that okay, and this person says that it has been a challenge. Can any panelists or any attendees speak to this? I will say that I haven't had this particular challenge because I've been able to work from home as long as I possibly can, but I'd be interested to hear from others.
Hey, Erin, this is Jamie Goldman from NSU. We did go back at the start of the fall term in August with shortened hours and abbreviated services. But in order for students to come back to campus, they called it the return of the sharks, which is our mascot. They all had to sign a acknowledgement of NSU's mask policy and say that they promise to abide by it on campus and they understand, that they can be asked to leave buildings. So we've been very lucky that we have something very concrete that helps us enforce the mask policy, but daily in the library, we have to walk around and remind students, hey, don't forget your ROS pledge, you need to put that mask back on. So even with something very firm, it's still a challenge.
Thanks, Jamie. That's I love the shark, idea of shark wearing a mask. The mascot at University of Florida is the alligator, and we have lots of like statues of gators and stuff around campus that have these like gigantic masks over them, and it's really cute. But I think it's also helping to get students on board with wearing masks. At least that's what I tell myself.
I can add something else real quick, another Florida perspective. And maybe it's because Florida, we had to, our library opened back up partially in August when the semester started. So maybe it's harder for us because we actually have to, keep some of our services and our physical spaces open. But similar at UCF, since we're the Knights, we had an Armor Up campaign. And so everything, if I had my background that would work, I could have the Armor Up campaign, in the background, on my virtual background. But basically, students have to go through a COVID self-checker, either on a mobile app or on a computer before they come to campus. This is for all employees, staff, faculty, and students when they come to campus to make sure that they are okay. They answer a series of questions. So of course they know that when they're on campus, anywhere on campus, even outside, they're supposed to wear a mask. But much like others are noting, it's a challenge. So we've had we have like an evacuation team inside the library that deals with all of the, when there's a fire drill or a fire alarm that goes off. We did construction recently, so we had lots of those happen on a constant. So we have a team that works with that. And so they kind of volunteer to be kind of like the mask enforcement team in the library. And it wasn't always the easiest thing. We had a couple students who I guess told on us because we were trying to get some students to comply, but then once we walk away, the students would take off their mask. They actually called into one of the lines, one of our, what do you call it? The insurance lines, or the, where you can call in and say, hey, something's not being done correctly. And so then we actually had to ramp up our mask, enforcement in the library because the office of the president got involved and said, hey, what's going on in the library? So what we've had to be doing now is switching to hiring staff that are almost like security guards to walk around and do some of that enforcing for us, because just the librarians and the library staff wasn't, I guess, official enough for some students to comply or feel like they needed to. So that's a consideration if there's budget or money there for departments to hire or have volunteers that are more of a security kind of, element that might help.
Thanks, Sandy. I don't know about anybody else on this session, but I definitely did not think that mask enforcement team was going to be something that I would ever have on my CV or resume as a librarian. That has definitely come out of left field. I am seeing in the chat that a lot of schools are getting really creative with this. One person mentions there's a peer student team that wanders around their library and talks to misbehaviors. I think that's a really great idea, because then it's not like, oh, it's the crusty old librarians telling us to wear masks. Then it's your peers, it's your fellow students. Somebody else mentions that their library dean goes out regularly to talk to people about not wearing masks. So lots of, and health ambassadors. Yeah, like these are really great ideas. All right, so bringing it back to our initial question about our library's reactions and responses. This is one that I'd love to hear from our panelists first, but then also just open up for general discussion. So in reflecting on how your roles and the services you provide to your user communities have changed due to COVID, what do you think has been gained? And what do you believe has been lost or maybe put on hold?
I can jump in first. So a lot of what I do during the normal times is teach in a special space. I teach in our makerspace. It has 22 chairs in it, but only comfortably seats 18. And right now, that's not going to happen. The door is closed. We have 3D printers, a laser cutter, all the typical makerspace stuff. I'm sure most people's campuses have something like that now. One of the things that we've lost is participation. We, taught something like 30 workshops a semester, and that's on top of the 30-ish to 40-ish class sessions we would teach in the space. And people would come and they would look, you could look at them and engage and be like, hey, person there, are you enjoying this? And you could get that impression of whether they're enjoying this. And in Zoom, what I see is a sea of capital letters and, black boxes, and no one has their microphones on, no one has their video on. And it's really challenging to maintain my level of enthusiasm when I'm basically talking to myself in front of a webcam. So that's been something we've lost. I think one of the things we've gained is we've had to become more creative in how we teach these same things. And we've had to become just kind of a little bit less literal in terms of what we're teaching with these things. When we're in person, I can say, we're going to learn about the Arduino. Here's an Arduino, plug the Arduino in. And when we're in virtual, I'm like, okay, so we're going to learn about Arduino by using this online tool that's kind of like an Arduino. And we're going to learn some of the same lessons, and some of them don't emulate in reality. In reality, it would do this, but on here, it's going to do that. And that's because it's an approximation. Let's talk about physics for a minute and how it's all an approximation. And it just allows us to kind of change what we're talking about a little bit.
I think I can jump into one thing that was sort of surprising, I think, is that we found that there were actually potentially greater opportunities for communication and transparency in our workload with the users we serve, our faculty, students, and clinicians, in that, we had to make huge cuts to our collections budgets, which is not something we've had to do for the last few years. And I think that sometimes when the library is doing great and everything is going well, faculty sort of forget that, we're behind the scenes making everything work so well. And when we had to make these, cancellations and cancel certain resources and services, we actually heard from faculty that's like, I really appreciate that you offered this. Why are you having to cancel this journal? Or, why can't you get this as an ebook? And there was an opportunity for communication around, well, these are sort of how vendor sales models works. And this is the limitations that the library sees in buying certain collections. And, this is a package deal, so we can't buy this single ebook. We have to buy, 50 for $10,000 or whatever. So in some ways, I feel like our services are more visible in that way, because we actually have to talk to our users about the challenges that we've been facing. And in some ways too, we've actually found more participation in our classes and consultations, because a lot of our students told us, I just didn't have time to come over to the library and attend a class, but now if it's on Zoom, I can just attend it wherever I'm at. So I think that part has been a positive experience for us.
That's great, Lindsey. Thank you. That's really unexpected positive outcomes.
Lindsey, I'll echo your comment about user engagement. I have actually seen staff engagement increasing as well. I hold a monthly lunch and learn brown bag session to talk about collections topics every month. And normally attendance is like around 1/8 of library staff show up to that in a hybrid or in-person format. Since COVID and since we've all moved online, the attendance is usually a quarter or a third of library staff. So I think in many ways, the virtual format sort of lowers the barriers for folks to participate in those sort of events, at least among library staff.
Yeah, that's a great point. I know that one thing that we have gained at UF is that our library dean started conducting a weekly town hall for all library staff and library employees. And at an institution of our size, it is impossible, if ever, that we are all engaged in the same space, listening to the same thing at the same time. And we have hundreds of people on these calls sometimes. And it was, every week, same time, that we get our FaceTime with our deans. And it was really something that I think we didn't even know that we needed. And that is now continuing, not quite weekly, but that is absolutely something that we gained. So I would love to hear from our participants and attendees as well, but I want to switch gears just for 1 minute. I'm trying to keep us on time track here. One of our participants posed a really good question in the chat, which is Greg asked, from a vendor standpoint, what additional services can we offer to help during these uncertain times? And people have been responding, fewer emails. I totally second that because we are super overwhelmed right now, and we appreciate all of the vendor and publisher offers. But I think what makes them really great is just extreme clarity of communication. You know, tell us what you're offering, how do we get it, and then maybe don't send the same email so many more times. What about others?
I'll jump in there. Maybe being sympathetic and possibly taking it up to your highest change to discuss discounts or helping us out in terms of budgets. Much like Lindsey, our university has been cut big time, the library in particular. And so it's making us very difficult. Since I'm the science person, most of my things are the most expensive, and some of them are going to be flat out cut. And I'm trying to do the best by my faculty and students. And, you know, it makes it hard if we can't negotiate. And I know things are tough for everybody, but, you know, to be sympathetic to us in particular, like just universities and colleges everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, this is Jamie again. I just wanted to say that the vendors I've worked with have been really understanding and generous, and we've asked several of them for, you know, consideration of our yearly inflation costs, knowing that not only was our budget flat to begin with pre-COVID, but that we had significant personnel and collection cuts during 2020. And a lot of them have been open to renegotiating our yearly inflation, some all the way down to zero for this time, because it's better to keep the collection and our money and our contract than to cancel it. So for the vendors that did that, I just want to say thank you, because we know it's a hard time for you as well. So thank you.
Thanks for the positivity, Jamie. And I absolutely second that. We really can't thank our vendor partners enough for, you know, those of you who are on the call with us right now. Thank you so much for your generosity and offering expanded access to so much content at this time, and for being very flexible with our really uncertain but probably bleak budgetary situation for the next few years. I think that's really something that we need is flexibility. And people are mentioning that they're really appreciative of the responsiveness and understanding about our budgetary crises. And I don't believe I've heard from any vendors who would rather that we cancel over getting flat pricing and keeping, you know, they'd rather have something than nothing. So that seems to be the tenor. All right, so I would love to keep talking about this, but I do want to make sure that we get to some of our other discussion topics. So switching gears a bit, but still in the same vein of the chaos that is 2020. Could you characterize your library's reactions and responses to anti-racism uprisings, particularly in the wake of George Floyd's murder, but also in the wake of ensuing police brutality and protests against police violence toward the BIPOC community?
I can jump in and start if no one else wants to. We've been really encouraged to look at our services and our programs and what we offer, and make sure that they are inclusive and that they are representative, and that we're being equitable in what services we offer and who we offer them to. And we've also been encouraged to really look for you know, micro transgressions and unintentional biases that may be present in our work that we are not aware of. However, I think that there's really more to do. You know, I think that that's not enough, and that one thing I would like to see my university do is participate more in sort of the activities that are happening in our communities outside of the university. So looking at our broader geographic community and being supportive of community efforts such as protests and marches, and you know, show our support for our larger community outside of the institution.
Thank you.
I'll mention a few things that we're doing here at NC State. One of the things is we are all required to take a diversity training, which the libraries purchased from the Diana Jones consultant group. And we were all given a year to complete that training. There have been fairly frequent discussion groups of individual sections of that so that folks can meet with each other. There have been some book groups that have been kind of not formalized, but created to discuss some of the pertinent literature, things like How to Be Anti-Racist and White Fragility and books like that. And we've also, in a more formal step, we've done some, we're in the process of bidding a consultant group to come do some diversity and equity training with library management. We're also doing a full wage and salary equity audit across the libraries. And again, these are just kind of some of the more concrete things that we're taking on.
Thanks, Colin. And in fact, that, I'd like to open this up to everyone in our lively discussion right now. And talking about concrete things in particular, I'm very interested in how your libraries or institutions or organizations are evolving to address systemic and institutional racism in concrete ways, such as, have you been holding exhibits? Have you changed your social media presence? Are you bringing speakers? Well, not to campus, but are you inviting speakers? Are you conducting trainings like Colin mentioned, or someone in the chat mentioned inclusive hiring policies and practices and how those might be changing? This could also be something like renaming buildings or starting a new committee. At UF, we have started a new DEI collection development fund that is now specifically earmarked for materials that will further DEI on campus. So, what are concrete things that your institutions and organizations are doing? I see in the chat, Eric mentions they managed to get Juneteenth as a recognized holiday. They're doing sessions with invited speakers. Someone at CU Boulder has been great at putting together resources on anti-racism resources.
I'll chime in as well. This is Michael. I think our archives and special collections at our universities often play a really important role in surfacing and foregrounding diverse voices from our institutions' histories and our states. Over the summer, UConn developed a one-credit undergraduate course on U.S. anti-Black racism that cut across all disciplines at the university, from history and anthropology to public health. And some of the contributions we were able to make to that was providing primary sources, photos, and so on about African-American student sit-in protests at UConn back in the 60s, but also much more recently than that, and situating those primary sources in context so our students can see the continuity over time of racism and anti-racism at the institution. So I think that's an important part of our role as libraries and archives, is providing that cultural memory for our communities. And we've done some other concrete efforts. We used some donor funds to build and curate a small collection of ebooks that we were able to market and promote with our African Studies Institute. We have just we're about to launch a working group to develop guiding principles for fostering inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility in the library's collections. The idea being that we'll then take those guiding principles and develop working groups to implement the principles in various aspects of collections. So it could be anything from looking at our overdue fines to looking at where we source our content. Are we buying from Amazon? Are we promoting bibliodiversity in our collection development? But we feel it's important that these be open conversations, that these be participatory conversations where at the end of the process, at least a majority of folks in the library feel a high degree of buy-in into these principles and will look at enacting them in their daily practice, as well as structurally.
Thanks, Michael. Your mention of guiding principles aligns with some of the comments we're seeing in the chat, where people are mentioning that They are infusing issues of diversity, equity, inclusion into strategic planning, into goal setting. I think sometimes those exercises, this is me speaking from the eye here, can feel a bit like they don't go anywhere. Like we spend a lot of time on strategic planning and, you know, developing guiding principles, and then the work always takes precedence over the, you know, the more theoretical work. But I do see that changing in particular this year. And I think it's more important than ever that we have those kinds of strategic directions that provide substance and meaning behind the work that we're doing. I also noticed people were mentioning how they've had to halt some of their DEI trainings due to executive orders coming from our government. That's really unfortunate, and I am sorry for institutions and organizations that have been affected that way. All right, so quickly, I feel like 2020 is like the wheel of chaos, and you kind of spin it and you could land on any issue we've talked about already, or it could be the devastating fires in the Western US, the state of the stock market, or it could be murder hornets. So it could really be any number of things, but we're in the midst of all of this. And I know it's hard to gauge right now, but in a very quick nutshell, how do you think that the events of 2020 will change our profession?
Can lead this off. So I think because of, you know, the nature of how much has changed and the uncertainty of pretty much every situation all the time, how much longer it's taking to do things, you know, the significant differences between institutions and states and, you know, different parts of our country on so many different, you know, factors of split and distinction across all that we do. I think it helps us in some ways for us to know that we're all in it kind of together, and we can kind of, you know, bounce ideas off each other. I mean, much of what people are putting in the chat, everybody's got a different perspective, but, you know, the fact that we are all going through all of these things, it's not like you just have one hurricane hitting the Gulf Coast, you know, and we have one coming to Florida now, that Zeta that went through Central America, looks like it's headed our way in the next week or so. So, you know, there's always something, but sometimes we're so disconnected because we're not in California dealing with the fires. We don't know what's going on. But I think most of the stuff with the pandemic and some of these other situations, we're all in this together. And just being able to kind of, you know, talk through strategies and work through the problems as a huge group, not just as a single library in one place, is one way that I think things are changing for us, because we're, you know, talking with colleagues and getting new ideas and kind of, you know, really trying to reach out to others in ways that we hadn't before. So I think our profession is coming together and is growing from, you know, from different kind of perspective than perhaps we ever have. So.
Yeah, and I think too, this crazy year has really put a spotlight on libraries and how adaptable we are, how quickly we were able to pivot our services, and just how essential we really are to the mission of the university. I think libraries have really stepped up to the plate and handled this, you know, as well as we could, and with limited resources and with limited staff. So I do want to, you know, acknowledge the contributions of librarians. And I hope that as a society as a whole, we can maybe learn to be a little more empathetic and understand, you know, what what other people are going through, and that it's just a tough time for everyone. Like you said, Sandy, we're all in it together. And I hope that that is sort of the perspective we can all approach this with.
Thanks, y'all. We also have some solid gold in the chat right now, which is awesome. We have become more adaptable. There are some negatives, of course, like some institutions, both on the vendor and academic side, may be facing mergers or closures. And someone mentions, for those who didn't know it before, libraries are essential. They are, you know, we are the last entity to close and the first to open on campus. I feel like we need t-shirts with that. That's like mic drop moment right there. is, if you didn't know it before, we are absolutely essential. Unfortunately, this is going to affect, just like individuals, weaker organizations and institutions more so than those who already had perhaps a strong financial endowment or, strong structure. A lot of people are mentioning greater collaboration, and also the fact that we're all getting a lot better at using virtual meeting tools. And I know that my team at University of Florida started using the Teams chat feature, and we sure as heck may not have started using it if we didn't go remotely. So, there's a lot of gloom and doom, but there's also a lot of positivity to come out of this. I think we've had to adapt. And also, as Lindsey mentioned, we've really had to dig into our wells of empathy to make it through this together and feel like we are actually working through it together. So I want to end on a positive note. And I'm stealing this from one of my favorite podcasts, which is Code Switch. And they always ask, what is giving you life right now? So my panelists, what is giving you life right now?
I'll start. I have a 6-year-old, and he sent me an unprompted email today. And it's the first email, as far as I know, that he's ever sent to anyone. And despite the crazy circumstances of how he's learning this year, he still is gaining literacy, and he's still learning how to use computers, and he's still, being, and that's great.
That's great.
That's a tough story to follow up on, but I will say my dog Charlie, he's the Shih Tzu Lhasa Apso mix, and he's been my therapy dog during all of this, and I always look forward to getting up every morning and having him sit beside me while I do my work and going for our walks in the evening. So I'm just very grateful to have my dog.
Yay, Charlie.
For me, it's been being able to spend more time with family, whether it's my parents who come in to check to see how myself and my 2 kids who are 8 and 10 are doing. Much like you, Colin, I've been kind of surprised at the great literacy skills they're getting using the computers. I think my son now is telling me he can somewhat type. He's like, Mommy, I can type things without looking at the screen anymore. And I'm like, that's great. That's called typing. I think those are great skills that they would not have picked up this early. Using PowerPoints and how you take text boxes and make them grow and move them around, stuff that they would never have done this early. And just spending time with them, like going out for walks and running and that kind of thing. I've actually been able to kind of pick up running in the past few months, which I would never have done before. So those are some good positives.
Sandy, same on the running. We're going to have to talk about that. Yes.
Echoing Sandy, yeah, I think sort of the quarantine mode really brought home to me the joy of being outdoors and being in nature. I'm doing so much more bicycling and hiking this past summer and fall. Also around September, a groundhog moved into my backyard. So I take a quiet joy in just watching him emerge from his burrow and amble around looking for grass to eat.
Okay, well, you won the pet support then, Michael. I don't know if any of us could top groundhog. Yeah, I think we want footage. We need pictures. So, well, this has been incredible. It's 1 o'clock. I think we all get kicked out of here within some certain number of seconds or minutes after the end of the session. Lots of great discussion in the chat about what's giving us life, baking, hiking, eating, Grubhub, our pets, our families. So, in the midst of all this chaos, as Earl Lewis mentioned this morning, we are actually finding grace in our communities and in ourselves. And so thank you so much for joining us. And I hope everybody has a great rest of your conference. And by the way, our contact info is on the slide. So if you do want to follow up with any of us, feel free to do so. And thank you.